Enrichment, Enlightenment, Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Good morning once again. June 28th, 2016. The Parsha is Shalach. The class today is going to be a little different than normal. Today is going to be more of an overview of a topic that usually is not discussed. And that is a blue thread called, well, the blue thread that we no longer have, or most people don't have anymore on tzitzit, called Techelet. And it's a mystery what happened to the Techelet and what it represents, and how could it be that a mitzvah that the Torah talks about, we lost the tradition too. So we're going to talk about that today, but before we do so, we're going to talk a little bit about tzitzit and talit in general. And I should note that it is rare that the Torah gives a reason for a mitzvah. You know, the Torah says, eat, blow a shofar. It does. Later, people give the commentary, repentance and coronating the king and all that good stuff. It just says, blow the shofar. It says, honor your parents. It says, do not kill. Even when it says Shabbat. It doesn't even say, keep Shabbat in order that you should have a meaningful time with your family. Now, it does say,
because I
creation. All right. So there is Shabbat would be an example where the Torah does mention creation. Yeah, or at least a parallel. Maybe not a reason, but at least a parallel. What are examples in Torah where a reason is given of a mitzvah? Can anyone come up with some? Like
the
you
matzah, as a remembrance.
Because you left in haste. Okay.
What about this?
Eating in a sukkah.
Yeah.
You are right. That is one of the few ones. It says you should eat inside of a sukkah in order that your descendants will know that I took you out of Egypt and you lived in the wilderness. So you're right. And that is odd, Hal. It's odd there that the Torah specifically mentions it. But one of the other ones is the talit, okay? Tzitzit. And let us begin here. Why don't you begin text 1. It's in this week's Torah portion. Here goes. God spoke to Moses, page 170.
God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them that they shall make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and they shall affix a thread of sky blue wool on the fringe of each corner.
Keep on going.
This shall be fringes for you, and when you see it, you will remember all the commandments of the Lord to perform them, and you shall not wander after your hearts and after your eyes, after which you are going astray. So that you shall remember and perform all my commandments, and you shall be holy to your God. I am the Lord, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord, your God."
So you never knew that Judaism was a fringe religion, did you? A lot of fringes going on here. And what many people don't realize is in the old days, all right, there was not a standalone garment called a talit or tzitzit. What it was is people naturally wore robes. And robes have how many corners? 4. I mean, a robe has 4 corners. Yeah. And on the corners, they would attach tzitzit. So the term tzitzit literally means the strings, the fringes. So they would actually attach that. So how many, pairs of robes did the average person have? I don't know. And we can talk here about why it was men, not women. We can do that a little bit later. But so they had robes, and at the corner of the robes, they would attach a tzitzit to it. They would have a hole, in each one, and they would wrap around the the same way today, there are 4 corners of a talit, and at each corner there is a hole in which we wrap around. It looks like 8 strings, but it really is 4. The 4 become 8 when they get wrapped around, and they're tied in a very specific way. So that was the way it always was. Yeah.
How many knots?
There are 5 knots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in between the 5 knots are a series of strings where you go, you can wrap, twist it around. Exactly. And the amount of coils vary by tradition. So if you ever order tzitzit or talit, you'll notice, do you want them strung the Chabad way or the Ashkenaz way or the Sfard way? And for the purposes of this class, do you want?
Chabad.
No, no. Do you want the blue string? And we're going to talk about that. Because if you look clearly here,
I didn't know you could still get the blue.
well, that's sort of what today's class is about. You haven't seen me wearing it, so obviously a lot of people don't. And we're going to talk about it. So it's today's going to be more of an academic kind of class, a little, to the door, someone at the door? A little spirituality at the end. It might be someone at the door. Nope. Elijah's already here. Well, maybe maybe we're only going to find the blue string, Hal, when Elijah the prophet tells us. But in any event, the Torah is very clear that the function of this is to remind us of mitzvot. Remind us that we have a uniform. And it's a physical reminder of who we are in order that we do not, stray. The Torah says, typically, our eyes will be attracted to what we see. It'll be very easy for us to be in other cultures and adopt other, ideas. The tzitzit is supposed to be a reminder, which would explain why people should always wear them. Okay, so that yes.
We're going to finish for that.
No.
So a question I have, and I doubt that this is an accurate translation, is the problem we have now, where they've translated sky blue.
Correct.
Isn't the problem we don't actually know the shade of blue?
Correct. The word in Hebrew is techelet,
and that's a color.
and that's mystery color. And we're going to talk about mystery color here. And we have this is the first time I've done a lot of research on it, but someone in our congregation, Warren Jasper, you might know him, he is an expert, and he gave me this 400-page book on the search for Techelet, because he's a dyeing guy. He's into
fabric guy.
Fabric and whatnot. So he really understands this. For me, this is me entering turf that I'm not familiar with today. So this is my apologies in advance, where other people might be more familiar with some of the science behind this. So the first couple texts are the Torah text, but we're going to venture in. Now, I should also note that when people use the word tzitzit, it means the strings. And what happened over time is originally was the strings that were attached to the robes, and as people stopped wearing robes, so you were no longer obligated in wearing tzitzit. Let me explain that again. The obligation of tzitzit for men is only if your garment has 4 corners. If your garment does not have 4 corners, then you don't have to. But we want to make a point of wearing tzitzit. It's supposed to remind us of something. So what do? We create a garment with 4 corners, and therefore put the tzitzit on the side. A regular shirt is not obligated in tzitzit. I'll tell you, there are sometimes some suits are a problem, actually. Because there's some suits, like in religious communities, they will be very careful about buying a suit. Where in the back it has a cut? So the split can be rounded, in which case it's not problematic. But if there's a split that has a square and you have 1, 2, 3, 4 full squares, it might be kind of problematic if you're not wearing tzitzit over that.
Over it.
Correct.
And the lack of obligation is because I get this sub-phrase here, on the corners of their garments.
Correct.
So
And that
garments
is
don't have corners.
exactly. But that is where later in history it's like, all right, we don't have corners anymore, but we're not looking for a way out of this mitzvah. This is supposed to be a reminder, so therefore let's create the garments with it. And there are 2 ways that happens. There is the garment that Jews traditionally wore, Jewish men, all the time. But that was sort of underneath, and that's what we call it tzitzit. That's what I wear always, and you just see the strings hanging from it.
What is that? Is that a shirt?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret.
It's not.
It's a little
Like a vest?
it's a little
Yeah.
thing that goes inside a sleeveless poncho
It's like
that has tzitzit hanging from it.
And it's open on the
You
side.
pull it over your neck.
Correct.
Over
You
your
just pull
head.
it on like I put my shirt on
It's
top.
like a poncho, a rain
Like a
poncho.
poncho, no sides are tied to it.
No,
The
I
sides
should have brought one in.
are open.
I
And in
thought
Hebrew school, the kids wore it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought it was like a frame, and you just because I used to wear it when I was in first, second, and third grade in Israel. It was just like a frame that you put over you, and it hangs front and back, no
Correct.
sleeves, no nothing.
No sleeves and no sides. Correct. So
Right.
frame is better than poncho because it doesn't go all the way around. Thank you, Amnon. Poncho was the wrong word. So that is the little tzitzit. They call that talit katan, a small talit. And that is a tzitzit that is always worn. Why is that always worn? Because the verse says, in order that you should always remember the
you shall
mitzvot.
remember,
So
yeah.
when do you have to remember the mitzvot? Only when you're praying? No, if anything, that's when you don't have to wear them. You have to remember the mitzvot day long, and that is the tradition of wearing tzitzit. And you have many Jewish men that wear it, and they tuck it in so no one sees it. And other people in Chabad tradition, we are, fine wearing it out. So the garment itself you don't see, but the strings we wear out. Okay. So that became what was called the talit katan, small talit. And then there was another talit gadol, a big talit, which is the one that you typically see, which you wear over you specifically while you pray. And the advantage of the talit gadol is that not only do you wear it, but you can actually wrap yourself in it. And there's Kabbalistic significance to that, which we're not going to do today. So talit katan, talit gadol, but in the original ancient days, there was neither. There was just the tzitzis that you added to your garments already. Okay.
So the women don't have to wear it.
So I'll address that briefly. This is a mitzvah that it's a positive mitzvah that only applies during daytime hours. There's no mitzvah wearing tzitzit at night. It's only during the day. And any positive time-bound mitzvah, traditionally, women do not have to do. So that there's something else here as well, and I don't want to say this in a patronizing manner, but many of the mitzvot that have to do with physical reminders, Torah says that men need more. And let's talk about this for a moment. I mean, this is a mitzvah in which it tells us the reason why you need a physical reminder. There's something about, even though we're talking about spiritual ideas, it's funny how sometimes a physical reminder is even more helpful than a spiritual reminder. Because I saw an interesting study that was done here. Well, we know. Here's two examples. You're driving down, a little above the speed limit. All of a sudden, you see a police car, right? We know what people do. They immediately stop. Go slower. Go slower. I saw this study that was recently done by psychologists to test the impact of being observed in social behavior. So they randomly assigned a group of students to wear either sunglasses or clear glasses. And they said they're testing a new product line, and they wanted them to wear. Some got the sunglasses, some got the other ones. And they were also given $6, and they said you can share this with strangers along the way. That was part of the test. And there was a beggar along the way. And what was a beggar.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting that those wearing clear glasses gave on average much more than those wearing the dark sunglasses.
Yeah.
Why?
Because they thought themselves
No, not-
ignorant.
It's sad, but that is human nature. There's that idea of me not being observed that somehow makes a difference. So the notion that we need a physical reminder to do mitzvot is what the tzitzit are
And
supposed
women's
to.
eyes don't wander, so.
Exactly. Oh yeah. The Torah here says, that's funny. You should not wander after your hearts. Now, then there's another discussion, and that is, all right, women are not obligated it. Can women choose to wear it because there are other mitzvahs that women are not obligated in? That's beyond the scope, really, of what I want to do today. But that is a separate discussion. Let's talk here about so this was the talit. This is the tzitzit. It says you have 4 corners. You attach strings to each one, okay? And even when you buy a tzitzit, there are 2 parts of it. There is the talit and there's the tzitzit. There's the garment. The talit means the garment of it, and the tzitzit of the talit are the strings. So when you see this word over and over, fringes, 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 what's the Hebrew for that? Tzitzit. The talit means the garment. So often you'll even have a talit where the strings will become messed up. You don't have to get a whole new talit. If someone in town knows how to tie these properly, you can just cut off the strings. You actually have to bury them. You don't discard them afterwards because they were used for a
Holy purpose.
mitzvah. Correct. Believe it or not, the talit can be discarded if you separate the two, because the talit is not actually the mitzvah. The tzitzit is the mitzvah.
What about the bracha? Or do you have a bracha?
Oh, what?
on it?
Oh, I see. So that was all right. So if you have a bracha here,
Yeah, you would take it off.
All right.
Okay.
yeah, but you'll notice they actually put baruch atah on many. What do they have there? They don't even have a hey for God. What do they have there?
A dalet.
So maybe for that
Right.
reason itself.
Not on all.
Not all talits. They do not need them. Exactly.
And when a man
Oh.
is
Buried.
buried, you cut off.
At least one string.
Uh-huh.
But
So
that's
there,
not
you render the tzitzit no longer
kosher.
kosher when someone is buried in a talit.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So for those that serve on the Chevra Kadisha, which is a very special and holy mitzvah, that is those that help prepare body for burial. So there's a whole way they wrap the body in burial shrouds in a talit that will actually make the tzitzit no longer valid. And that happens by, one of the strings. So there's a lot of laws what happens when strings get off, the story of the person who goes to the dry cleaners and brings in New York and in other areas, people are familiar with dry cleaning talit. They come to a small town and they bring in their talit and they pick it up and they get this bill for $38. $38? What happened? They're like $4 to clean it and $34 to untangle all the knots. Okay, we're behind here, folks. Let's go a little further. So we see that there is a mitzvah of having a tzitzit and a talit. Maimonides tells us clearly, Brian, who he's like an encyclopedia of mitzvot. He takes the whole Torah and divides them into mitzvot, and he writes,
Thus, this mitzvah contains two directives: to make a tassel on the fringe of a garment, and to wind a strand of techelet around the tassels. Both of these directives are indicated by the numbers 1538, which states, by numbers,
Right.
1538, excuse me, which states, and you shall make tassels, and you shall place on the tassels of the corner a strand of techelet.
So there's two distinct mitzvot, which would explain why even if we don't have Techelet today, we still do the other mitzvah.
And
Because
it's still
they're
considered
a
a
mitzvah.
valid,
Correct,
yeah.
because there's two independent mitzvot, the way Maimonides sees them.
So
And
in his time, they didn't.
We're going to
have
talk in a
Techelet
moment.
either?
When did Techelet stop existing? So we will do that soon. And let's do this, Pam. This is important as well. It says you should look at the tzitzit and you should see all of the mitzvot. The way the Midrash interprets that as, keep on reading.
You'll remember all the commandments of God. The numerical value of the Hebrew word
Tzitzit.
is 600.
And next week we'll have the whole.
600.
Next week we'll have the class. This is a good lead up to next week's class on numerical value.
Add to this the 8 threads and 5 knots, and we have a total of 613. Wow, the number of commandments.
So he goes through a calculation. What does it mean I look at the tzitzit and I remember all the mitzvot? Well, I remember that the numerical value of tzitzit is 600. Add in 8 threads, 5 knots, 613. Simply put, it's just a reminder. I wonder where the notion of putting a string around your finger came from as a reminder.
Ooh.
I don't know. I'm just throwing that out. I'm not saying this is the source for it, but it's interesting how the string is the reminder. Now, according to Rashi, it's this calculation that is the reminder. According to Nachmanides, he says the blue string, which represents the sky. The word in Hebrew is techelet, which comes from the same root word as tachlit, which means everything. That is the reminder. So there's a discussion what is supposed to be the reminder. But there are many stories in the Talmud. There's a story in the Talmud where there's this guy who's on his way to do a sin. You remember this one, Hal, or not? No? He's on his way to do a sin. And all of a sudden, as he's getting ready to do this...
He talks about sin and me.
Yeah, of course, Hal. You're the man, right? And then as he's preparing to do the sin, he's taking off his tzitzit, and boom, that's his reminder. And he stops to do his sin. There's that story in the Talmud. Actually the Talmud says the tzitzit slaps him in the face. It actually said it swung around. And so there's that idea of it always being a reminder, a Jewish uniform. Okay. Let's talk for a moment about this dye. It says you should put the dye of Techelet on it. So we need to know what Techelet is. And in the times of the Talmud, there's discussions as to what is Techelet. So Talmud is written, at least the second part, the Gemara, in the 400s and the 500s. So they're still discussing what it is at that time. So most of the text we have is from that period, from about the 0 to 400, 500. Because that's the first time the oral tradition was written down. So these are key texts. We only have a few of them. So we got to look at them and work backwards and then go on this scientific, hunt to find out what it is. Why don't you do the next one?
Abaya inquired of Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yehuda, how do you dye the thread of Techelet? He replied,
You need a cup? I'm sorry. Yes.
There's a cup up there.
You want to show?
On top.
Yeah? Keep on reading. Sorry.
we take the blood of the chilazon.
So we use the blood of an animal called the chilazon. Now, the problem is we don't know what a chilazon is. So he tells...
Like
But what about tolat shani?
Here it's a chilazon, not
Okay.
tolat. Chilazon.
You don't know what chilazon is?
Not the biblical chilazon.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
there's... What does it mean in modern Hebrew?
Chilazon is what do you call it? The one that crawls. Oh shoot! Well, I don't know what it is in English.
Oh, berale?
The one with the shell on it, and it comes out of the shell, and it,
Snail.
Okay, so...
what do you call it?
Snail.
Snail. That's it. Snail.
So I would want to know, Amnon, when did that word start being used as snail? Because that is going to be one of the theories today, but it might be a modern word, and we don't know. So it comes from the chilazon, and we're going to go a little faster because of time. The techelet is only valid if it comes from the chilazon. And if it is made from not the chilazon, it is invalid, the Talmud tells us. You cannot use a synthetic color. It has to be from the chilazon. The next text 6, tells us also from the era of the Talmud, it doesn't mean the blood of a chilazon, it is a secretion of the chilazon. That was the meaning of dam here. A secretion of the chilazon.
So you shouldn't kill something.
No, it's not. It was not. It was a secretion of the chilazon that resulted in this dye that was then used to get a blue color. Okay.
And they
Now-
use the word dam for that?
The Talmud uses the word dam.
Huh.
I don't think snails.
That's interesting because the
Dam.
Talmud uses the word dam, and now I'm looking the Tosfot, which is a couple hundred years later, interprets that as a secretion.
Sula. Yeah.
Oh, you're reading the Hebrew already. Yeah. Now, at the time of the giving of the Torah, apparently this was obvious. Everyone knew what a chilazon is and a techelet was. This was a typical color of the times. Over history, it became lost. The question is, when did that happen? Though some suggest it happened just after the time of the Talmud, 500, 600, 700, there is some evidence that in some parts of the world it was used after that point as well. Okay? So if you look on the next page, do you have all the loss and revival section 2? I don't know what is in the...
Yes.
Yeah.
175.
175.
You have this? Yes. So over here let me read this to you. There was a lot of restrictions and bans on common people dying in history. So in the year 100 BCE, that's when the Roman Empire imposed general restrictions on Torah observance. Remember the story of Rabbi Akiva who couldn't study Torah. There were a lot of restrictions and Roman persecution. So that might have been a time that was hard. But fast forward, Caesar restricted the use of dyes to the governing classes. Okay? This is in the year 100 BCE. Then go to the 1st century. Nero issues a decree that gave the emperor exclusive rights to wear purple or blue. Okay? And then I have a few others examples as well. And in the year 500 is the last positive identification of Techelet in Jewish
What
texts.
year?
500 of the Common Era. So what it appears is due to persecution and the fact that it just wasn't able to be produced, there was a loss in what we will call Misorah. Misorah is an important word. Misorah. Tradition.
Mhm.
Most of Judaism, everything was passed down. We don't have this broken telephone. Most things were passed down well. When it comes to the Techelet, there's a gap. We just don't know how. And the question here is, can we take the clues in the Talmud and Midrash and go on a search and rediscover it? Or do we say that since the Misorah was lost, we don't reintroduce it? That's sort of the question here. What are your thoughts?
Is it related to the temple, the destruction of the temple, or not?
Not really.
No, because this is an independent mitzvah. This is not
I mean
offerings.
the blue thing, the
No,
color.
there are many mitzvot where we say once the temple was destroyed, we no longer bring the offerings. Or this is independent. This is
But didn't it coincide with that?
no. This is actually
The Romans helped in the loss of knowledge. That's what you're talking about.
correct.
Yeah.
The persecution, helped the loss of knowledge, but it didn't happen like when the temple was destroyed. It was an era, and over the next couple centuries. So it seems as if there's a little guy hiding it over here and someone hiding it over there, and over time that became lost. So we have the Midrash in text 7, for instance, that writes, at a certain time, why don't you read, Hal?
And your threads. This is a reference to the Sanhedrin, whose members are distinct with the thread, as in the cord of Techelet in the teeth.
It sounds like at some point in history it was so rare to have the Techelet that only members of the Sanhedrin, even in Judaism, Sanhedrin were like the judges. So they had to smuggle it, and not everyone could get it. There's another place in the Talmud where they are discussing Techelet, and they have to write it in code. Do this next text, text 8.
The sages sent a message to Rabbah. A pair was coming from Akkaz, and an eagle captured it, and in their hands were things made in luz. And what were those things? Threads of Techelet. In the merit of the merciful one, and in their own merit, the pair left in peace.
That's a very odd statement of the Talmud. So the commentators explain the pair was 2 scholars that were trying to smuggle it. The eagle was who? The soldiers. Luz was a place in which Techelet was manufactured. And the point here was that they came to try to confiscate it, but thank God they got away. So even in Talmudic times, it was already risky. And finally, one last text was, now we only have white strands left. The Techelet has been hidden. The mitzvah is now performed with only white alone. So at a certain time in history, this Midrash, 600-700s, this is what he writes, yeah.
Luz
Yeah.
is where Yaakov laid down. That's not just like Brooklyn or Queens.
It's a significant place.
Yes, so they were specially blessed, I
Interesting.
suppose, if that's where they came
Interesting.
from.
Yeah.
But is that
It is. No, you were
honored
correct.
in the Chabad tradition
Of course.
that
What,
Luz?
lose a special place? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely. Of course.
I'm asking. I'm
No,
just
absolutely.
asking.
So this
where is
Midrash,
Luz is the place where Yaakov
His
Jacob put the pillow down under his head.
he had
Where
three,
the angels went
Jacob's
up
ladder.
and down the ladder.
That's interesting. Good. No, that's a very good point. So we see that it was done quietly, secretly, and it makes sense how it was lost. This was not common knowledge, right? Okay. So the question is just, and again, I said this class is a little different than usual because it's more scientific now. Should we try to rediscover it or not? And for 1,000 years, from 700s until the 1700s, it was just lost. In the 1800s, someone went on the quest. I'm going to find out what the Techelet is. And the person's name was Rabbi Gershon Henoch Leiner, the Rajiner Rebbe. Rajin. Radzin. I don't know where Rajin is. Maybe someone can find out. Probably somewhere in Poland.
It would be Raj.
Raj. So he went on a quest. I want to find it. A, is he felt that it was important to do this mitzvah in the optimal state. And B is he felt that maybe this was like, find the mystery of the Techelet. It's related to bringing Mashiach or something. I think there were some messianic aspirations in it as well, that this was a mystery that was important to find. So he went around to the leading aquarium of the time in Naples to go study different fish and see if any of them have it. And he writes a book, Sifunet Munechol, things that are buried under the sea. That's the name. He writes a book all about it. And this is his introduction to the book. Look what he writes.
What text number?
Text 10, page 176.
Go ahead.
It is incumbent. You want to read this out loud? He writes,
It is incumbent upon any Jew who possesses the strength to seek out this
Chilazon.
hilazon in order to grant Israel the merit of performing this mitzvah that has been forgotten from the Jewish consciousness for a number of centuries.
So he runs, and he was not only a good expert in Torah, but he knew a little biology, and he comes to the conclusion that the cuttlefish is the long-lost chilazon. And he writes it, and he tells his followers, the Hasidim, I've found it's the cuttlefish. But at that time, it was most other groups did not accept his decision. It was always, if you were a student of the Rajiner, you were this kind of thing. And even on the market today, if you're looking there, we're going to say there's another theory that's more widely accepted than his. We'll say why in a moment. So when you look for Techelet today, you'll see Rajin Techelet, cuttlefish, or the snail one, which we're going to get to in a moment, which is better known. So his Hasidim were it.
Are there Rajin today?
That's a good question. I don't know. I know that in times of the 5th Chabad Rebbe, one of his grandchildren or son-in-laws then became a follower of the 5th Chabad Rebbe, and we did not believe that theory that this was it. So he was sort of didn't know what to do because he was his father or his father-in-law found this, and he asked the Rebbe to shout, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, he said, out of respect for you or whatever, you should wear it. That's what he told him. It was an interesting story.
Did they wear this in the desert during the Exodus?
You're saying, where did they get the original Techelet from? That's a good question. When they were first instructed about it. But you know what? We have Techelet, though, all over in biblical times. It was necessary for the building of the Mishkan, the sanctuary. So presumably they had these threads from Egypt and other places. So it's very likely that at that time it was known.
So it's easier to be a snail than a fish because of the sheer presence of the desert and the water and all that kind of stuff. So
the Rajiner came up with this theory. It was not accepted by most people. We have to fast forward to the 20th century. There's someone whose name is Rabbi Yitzchak Herzog, who's known as what?
In England, no?
Herzog, well, he was the chief rabbi of Dublin, Ireland, but later he became most famous for what? First chief rabbi of? Rabbi Herzog, chief rabbi of Israel in 1948. So he became... How do you mind shutting that off? Thank you. He became the chief rabbi in Israel. But he was, in addition to being a rabbi, also a professor and a scholar. And he went to all the experts in London, you were right, to try to figure out what it is. And he sent the Rajiner little samples to the scientists to analyze. Mm-hmm. And they determined that the blue dye was not organic in nature. Wow. But rather, it was inorganic dye known as Prussian blue.
That makes a huge difference.
And he refused to believe that the Rajiner Rebbe was deliberately misleading his followers. Yeah. So he asked the dye masters of Rajin to explain the process. And upon investigation, he solved the riddle. The Rajin recipe called for boiling the cuttlefish ink. And I'm reading here because this is not my area of expertise. the cuttlefish ink to very high temperatures, and then adding iron and potassium. Under these conditions, the organic molecules break down, and all these other things yielded this color, and there was this reaction that produced the blue. But if that's the case, then guess what? There's nothing special about the cuttlefish. The cuttlefish is not an essential component of it, and for that same matter, anything could have done it. So Rabbi Herzog then this was his way of contradicting it, so he said that the Rajan Techelet, in his opinion, was not authentic because there was nothing about the cuttlefish. They broke it down and it was all these other things that they added that did it. So then he himself was unable to come to another theory, but he was the first that put out this theory, text 11. Back to you, Kimberly.
Of the species known to have been used by the Phoenicians in purple dyeing, the one which furnishes a dye answering, at least to some extent, to the tradition of the Techelet nuance is none other than the Murex trunculus.
Anyone familiar with that?
None other than that?
It is a marine snail. It's a snail.
Oh.
And he says, if you're looking for something, and in his estimation, text 12, he writes, I personally don't believe that it is this. It's unlikely, but it's still a possibility. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the debate that happened in the last 100 years with this in the last 5 minutes. What are the things that we know about the chilazon? So we'll do this quick. The Talmud tells us, text 13, a few things. A is the color. It says the body of the chilazon resembles the sea or the sky. Its body is similar to that of a fish. The next one is look at the next piece. It has cycles how often it comes up. And with its secretion, Techelet is dyed, and therefore it is very expensive. So he writes, the color is the sea. Its form is like a fish. It comes up every 7 or 70 years, and it is expensive. But most important is text 14, Brian. Read that one.
Techelet that is referred to regarding the tzitzit must be dyed with a specific dye whose beauty is durable and does not change. If it was dyed with another dye, even if it has an appearance similar to that of the sky, it is invalid for tzitzit.
So it has to be something that never goes away. And the Talmud discusses, in the times of the Talmud already, there were people who sold fake Techelet. Unfortunately, these things are nothing new. And they had a test that they would do to see whether or not it became undone or not. So when it came to this snail, they thought it did a pretty good job. The problems with this theory, Rabbi Herzog writes in his book is called The Rural, you can read it, 17a. He says, first of all, science knows nothing about this cycle of it appearing of 70 years. Okay? Now, the other problem would be, what color did we say the snail is more of?
It's supposed to be blue.
Blue. And what color did it say it was?
Purple.
Purple. That should be the most obvious. Fast forward to the 1980s, in Ramat Gan, they were taking this snail, and they realized something funny, that when they looked at it on a cloudy day, it was more purple. When they looked at it on a very sunny day, it was blue. And together they realized that when the dye is in a reduced state and exposed to ultraviolet light, it goes from purple to blue. So that is what they did, and they used this snail, and they expose it to this light, and then it becomes blue. And based upon this, there are many people who say this is the best shot we have. Now, it's still a snail, not a fish, right? Unless one interprets the Talmudic idea that it's a sea-like creature. Dag in Hebrew means fish, but maybe dag means a sea-like creature. It's also a little bit odd that it would have to be exposed to this light in order for it to be blue. So for all of these reasons, many people don't accept it. The Chabad position is, especially since we lost the tradition, the Misorah, as I said, we don't do it. Here's a letter from the 5th Chabad Rebbe, text 18. I was pleased to receive the books of your righteous father. I greatly I'm interested in reading this. However, I am unable to agree to their thesis. The first Chabad Rebbe writes that there is no Techelet nowadays, and elsewhere in the early Kabbalistic Chabad books, it writes Kabbalistically that Techelet is something that is lost, which will only be around in the times of Mashiach. So in the Chabad tradition, there is no Techelet nowadays. However, if you do look for it on the market, you will find it. And you will see Rajin Techelet, and you will see the snail Techelet. More people use the snail Techelet. But again, because of all the reasons we mentioned today,
Well, while you were explaining it, I was doing my own research here.
good Amnon.
And they were talking about the cuttlefish, and it makes a lot of sense to me. It
Tell me,
is.
'cause I told you today this is not my area of expertise.
It
so-
is the ink. It is the ink that the fish shoots out in order to protect itself, to hide itself from others. And it's the ink, and we saw, you see it all the time in movies, that the ink is kind of blue, but then when it mixes with the water, it gets lighter and lighter, and it's real, it's ink. That's what it is.
So what about the organic and inorganic? I mean, we have to do more research.
I know,
This is-
I know.
yeah.
That makes sense because it's come.
Didn't have to be in the middle of the desert. They could have taken it from Egypt and other places. It doesn't say the fish was there. The dye was there.
Mhm.
That was a common dye in the
But
ancient
they-
world.
They wouldn't have taken it from Egypt because they had, for the most part, lost their traditions when they first left.
But I believe it was a common dye in the ancient world. This is not a dye unique to Judaism.
I see.
We're saying this was a common dye. And I will finish on in Chabad tradition, I said we don't have it until the times of Mashiach, and it finishes on a very Kabbalistic level, and it discusses white in Hebrew represents which attribute? Purity. And it would be chesed, it would be kindness. And in our relationship to God, there are always two emotions we have in our relationship with God. One is the love, and one is
The fear.
the fear. And fear is not a good word. Fear does not mean I'm
Yirah.
afraid of my backside being hurt. It's an awe. It's I don't want to do anything to mess up the relationship. And it says that Kabbalistically the white represents chesed, and then you have your little bit of yira, which Kabbalistically is related to blue. And the last text over here, interesting, text 21. We'll finish with what the Rebbe writes. Again, going according to the Chabad tradition that we do not have Techelet today. Let's finish with this last text. Pam?
One of the differences between the Techelet and white strands in the tzitzit is that the white strands allude to the divine service of fear, abstaining from the negative, whereas the white strands represent the service of love, proactive engagement with good.
Meaning they're staying away from bad and there is doing good, which relate to love and fear. Keep on going.
The fact that there is no Techelet present in any of the 8 strands today and they are all white teaches us this lesson. Our primary method of service today is with love. Certainly, according to Kabbalah and Hasidut, this is the case. As Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the primary architect of the Kabbalah, stated, the matter can only come to us through love.
It's interesting that even, a couple centuries ago, they're already acknowledging that today's generation relates better to
Love than fear.
that would we agree that the fear component in today's society with children, with education, it used to be a lot more fear oriented.
So wait, the text says white and white.
Yeah,
So
It's a mistake. It's a typo, and I was bothered by that. It's a typo. It meant to
So-
say blue.
which one is
One of the differences between Techelet and the white is that the white is
The white
no,
is
the blue is that the
blue is
blue
fear.
strand divines to the divine service of fear, while the white is chesed. That is a
Yeah.
typo, and I looked at that in the Hebrew and correct. So that's an interesting idea, and I think it makes sense how today, whether it's getting Jews involved more in Judaism or anyone for that matter, the primary motivation today is one of love. And he says, Kabbalistically, that is one of the reasons why we've lost the tradition of the Techelet today, because our generation has a more challenging time relating to the component of Yira. We will, because we're
But
over time, we'll
Yira-
finish. Yira is necessary in our service of God, absolutely.
But here is not fear, it's awe.
Correct.
So
Correct.
that's
Correct. I'm not saying there is no room for awe. There absolutely is. If
No,
you
but
learn
Hashem
Tanya,
wanted both.
God wants both. Absolutely.
So,
But this is an illusion in the fact that our Techelet is only white today. I know a little different style class today, but I guarantee you, everyone in this room knows 99% more than all. I didn't even know this before we had class today. I really did not know this about the two theories of Techelet and the search for Techelet. And if you look on the market, again, you will see some, but most Jews do not use it. If you want to see, and we can, if you want to see what it looks like, these would be what the strings would look like. And we can hold it here. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We will be back here next week at the same time. Have a good week.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, My Life, My Will with Gisela DiCarlo, The Tanya Love Show, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Triangle Be Well with Howard Jacobson, Lunch and Learn with Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, Current Affairs with Amnon Nissan. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.